personal experiences of something huge and that's why I wanted to do this, and why I'm glad that there are other people doing this. No one person's experience is going to represent the whole thing. It can't. But having a great many personal experiences, I think, will help future generations, if the technology survives, long after I'm gone, to properly understand better what happened and why it continues to matter.
Robbie died on New Year's Eve, so the end of 87. He just escaped having to be buried in concrete. People had to be buried in concrete. I wasn't allowed to view the body.
4 of my lovers died all in the late 80s, early 90s. One of them, the boy that taught me how to drive, actually, died in the back of a Mercedes-Benz. So we put him in the back of a friend's Mercedes-Benz because he loved cars, right? And we drove him, and just as we drove into London, and he died in my arm. We got to the fucking hospital, and as we opened the door, a really nice nurse said, "You realise your friend is gone?"
We were just at that point, if you like, of feeling hopeful about us. And he'd gone to his hospital, and he didn't see his own consultant at that time. But he was told, basically, and it was a word which I don't hear anymore, thankfully, but he was told he was a treatment failure.
By the time Robert came out of hospital, he was 4.5 stone. I could carry him up 4 flights of stairs to his bathroom because he wanted a bath in his bath. You know what I mean? We forget this completely devastating impact.
We were supposed to meet on the Monday, and unfortunately I kept phoning, couldn't get hold of him, and by the Tuesday, when I was phoning, the police answered the phone, and he'd hung himself.
The early 80s and the mid-80s and the early 90s was typified for me by burying people, of just knowing all those people who you knew around on the scene were dying.
The rest of the world is oblivious to you. Not only oblivious, they treat you as diseased pariahs.
I wasn't going to tell my friends because I would sit in conversations and people would say, if anybody with HIV was part of a group I was sitting in, I would just leave, you know. And I was sitting right in the middle of these conversations. And I thought, there's no way I was going to disclose my status.
You know, we were all double gloved and double gowned, and he was kept in an isolation room. All of his cutlery was plastic, paper plates. Even his notes had infectious written on them. We didn't touch them without gloves on. You know, his bedding was burnt. I mean, it was just horrendous.
There's 3 particularly dark hours that I think about still. One was a tall Italian glamorous man who came out of her side room at night time in a blue ball gown and 6-inch heels when 6-inch heels were hard to come by. And he swung around and he just looked so gorgeous. And then he started coughing up bits of his lung. And this blue gown with these dark, dark flecks on it, it was just so hard. It was just so painful. And you knew exactly what was happening.
Nobody thought to test me because I was, straight white woman. I hope it will be different nowadays. I'm pretty sure it will be, but back in those days, I didn't really know any women who were positive.
There are lots of people living into older age now who dismembered their lives the moment they were told that they were HIV. They just wrecked the whole lot. They blew all their money. They drew down their pensions. and waited to go out with a bang. And 20 years later, they're still here, except that they don't have their pensions and they don't have their employment. They might not even have their accommodation.
Here I am within touching distance of, of retirement age, and I haven't had a paid job for 20 years. I have no pension. I probably won't have a state pension. I have no property. And yet at the same time, both Paco and I are so thrilled that we are alive.
This junior doctor said, does Robbie, I'd like to give him diamorphine, which is a polite way of saying, And I'm going, yeah, fine. He said, does Robbie know he's dying? And I said, yes. And the doctor burst into tears. Doctors and nurses used to go to people's funerals, because in a strange kind of way, we were all in this together. And I think HIV care, in a way, became the model, the gold standard of care in the UK for the NHS.
I feel sorry for them. They were just wrong place, wrong time. These people they were in the prime of their lives. They never got to tell their story.
Looking at kind of the whole epidemic and looking back at the 80s and the 90s, I'm just incredibly struck and touched by all of the lives that were lost. And for me, as a gay man who's HIV positive, that's part of my story too. All of those who came before me, that's part of my story. My life is very different, but it is part of my story, and I think that I don't want to lose any of that. I don't want any of them to be forgotten, because I think it's so powerful to remember all of the men and women who died and to hold on to that.
They can never be forgotten. They did so much for us. And that's why sometimes I get so angry with the younger people now that just think, oh look, it's a little, I can take a tablet for it. This tablet wouldn't exist if it wasn't for those guys.
It seems to me that the history of HIV/AIDS must teach us the value of compassion, must teach us the value of hope, because what seemed utterly dark and pointless and cruel has been treated and has been turned into something of hope. And especially in these days when things are strange and turning, you want to hold up this beacon of togetherness and solidarity and unity.